Questions about Stravogin abound. The key to understanding his character comes in the withdrawn chapter 9b, entitled At Tikhon's. Here we fill out his character and come to understand his restlessness and his listlessness, his unwillingness to act on behalf of anyone or anything on his return from Switzerland. What I'm going to do is tell the story of Stravogin from the perspective of this meeting with the town's pious bishop, and then return to show what it reveals about Stravogin, the man, as we understand him through part 2. There are 3 stages of his life, as we have seen, or 4. First, childhood under Stepan, his tutor. Second, his wild university days. Third, the chasing of the ladies in Switzerland and his dabbling in politics. And then fourth, the Stravogin we see in the action of the demons. His confession at Tikhon's reveals something deeper about his character than we previously saw. Let us situate his confession. First, part 2 begins with Stravogin making the rounds. He visits Shatov, and Shatov sees something is weighing him down at the end of part 2, chapter 1, and suggests that Stravogin go and unburden himself to the bishop Tikhon. Stravogin then goes to visit his wife, the lame girl, Marya Timofeevna, in part 2, chapter 2, entitled Night Continued. There he offers to run away with her and to live quietly in the mountains of Switzerland, but she declines. He pays Fedka the convict on the way home, but never tells him what to do. Fedka will think he has permission to kill Marya. And why is killing Marya important? Here note that Pyotr Stepanovich has plans for Stravogin to make him the populist king, the person the people themselves will rally around after the revolution, the Tsarevich, as we learn in part 2, chapter 8, Ivan the Tsarevich. You'll win them over, you'll look and win them over, Pyotr promises. And Pyotr thinks that all Stravogin will need in return is the happiness that he could have with Lisa. Give Stravogin Lisa and eliminate the lame girl, and Stravogin will take the job of Tsarevich. Again, listen to Pyotr. I'll do it for you without money. I'll end it tomorrow with Marya Timofeevna, without money. And by tomorrow, I'll bring you Lisa. You want Lisa tomorrow? But Stravogin is not saying yes to Pyotr, and Pyotr scolds him for having no desire. He calls Stravogin a lying, rotten, lascivious, pretentious little squire, a man who holds himself aloof from the doings of politics and even from the affairs of the heart. But he will still give Stravogin a few days to make his decision. Stravogin leaves his talk with Pyotr Stepanovich, goes home, sleeps uneasily, as we learn in the appendix, and then sets out to visit Bishop Tikhon, again, as we learn in the appendix. This is where the talk happens in the course of the book. The appendix has 2 parts. The first part introduces the bishop and then recounts a conversation between Stravogin and the bishop on the nature of faith and God's interactions with the world. It leads up to an awful confession, which Stravogin hands to Tikhon at the end of part 1, and Tikhon reads in part 2. Part 2 consists of this confessional epistle from Stravogin, which recounts his stages, and then a renewed conversation with Tikhon about the possibility of forgiveness. I'm going to focus on the letter and their reaction to this, but a few words about the conversation that makes up part 1 are in order. The monastery is on the outskirts of town. Bishop Tikhon has an ambiguous reputation. Many seem to think he is pious, and he has ardent admirers that come from all over Russia to seek his advice. But others think he's a tippler. But our author disputes that theory. Tikhon retired, as our narrator says, because he proved unable to inspire any particular respect for himself in the monastery. He had gained a reputation for careless living and almost for heresy. Serious downside charges, I would say. But what are we to make of them? I want to suggest something here. Heresy is as heresy does. Let's look at how Tikhon acts acts to determine what his reputation should be. Stravogin is distracted, and the conversation starts slowly. Finally, Stravogin goes a bit crazy, making wild and incoherent statements about what he saw and felt. Stravogin thinks he has been having visions. In fact, he thinks that he is possessed with a demon. Tikhon mentions that it is most likely an illness that he suffers from, but that it could be a demon. Tikhon believes in demons. They are rare, he says, but real. He believes in demons, and he believes in God. Each is a canonical view, and each shows that there is much more to life than the scientific laws of nature. If there is a soul, there can be demons and God. Stravogin, however, wants to believe in demons without believing in God. He thinks he sees something possessed inside of him, but he takes up ridicule in the belief of God almost immediately after he says that. For this, Tikhon calls him a lukewarm person, instead of a believer or an atheist. Stravogin appreciates this very much, and after Tikhon says it, Stravogin tells him that he loves him 3 times. In this context, Stravogin hands Tikhon a letter of confession. And the confession is something. The bad Stravogin, the one of Petersburg lore, was much, much worse than we were led to believe. We had the impression earlier that he was wild, that he liked to do bad things like getting in a duel. And he was both those things. Extremely shameful, immeasurably humiliating, mean, and above all, ridiculous position I have happened to get in my life has always aroused in me, along with boundless wrath and unbelievable pleasure, Stravogin says in the letter. But he was worse. He had caused a young girl to be punished unnecessarily. He hid her penknife, and she took a beating for losing it. Then later, he raped the young girl. It was among the most heinous crimes. The young girl, Matrosha, got sick, probably with brain fever. She feared she had killed God, as she told Stravogin, and she soon thereafter hung herself in the family's garage. The girl had lost her faith. It was after the rape of Matrosha and her suicide that Stravogin married Maria Tofimovich, an ecstatic idiot who was secretly in love with Stravogin. He married her, he says, instead of killing himself, which he had contemplated. Nothing uglier could be imagined, he says. Nothing could be uglier? He faced a choice: kill himself or marry the idiot. He chose the marriage. His marriage to Maria was an insult to marriage, an insult to respect for marriage. He thought about suicide, showing contempt for life. Instead, his marriage to Maria continued his way of loving bad, of insulting the institutions that make society, institutions like minding the innocence of youth and marriage. He had lied, raped a young girl, insulted God, caused a suicide, and now married an idiot. Who witnessed the marriage? Kirillov, Pyotr Stepanovich, and Maria's brother, Lebyadkin. And then he left to go home. This is where we get the ear-biting and the nose-pulling incidents, and ultimately his own brain fever that is used to explain those crazy actions. Don't the nose-pulling and the ear-biting look like child's play next to the rape of Matrosha? Why? Why did Stravogin go home? We are left with some inferences from his brain fever. He was filled with spite at his base actions. He could hardly bear living with himself. He was sad. He wore a mask, as we saw in the earlier parts of the book. His mask was to keep up some appearance of respectability while being conscience-stricken and anguished about his misdeeds. No one in his town knew him, and no one could know him, because he had such a terrible burden on his soul for his past actions. So he was also unknown, more respected than he should be, or than he knew he should be. This is the cause of his brain fever. It was much worse than feeling bad for a duel or for partying in Petersburg. The people of the town, including his mother and his teacher, totally underestimated how bad Stravogin was, and hence what his soul had to bear. Then he went abroad for 4 years. He went to many places. He visited monks at Mount Athos. He went to Egypt, the oldest civilization. He went to Iceland, barely part of civilization, all in the hopes of finding rest for his soul. He could never find it. He was traveling around Germany when the second decisive moment put an end to this phase of wandering, trying to run away from himself and his problems. He had a dream. The dream had 2 aspects. The first was he was in an art gallery in Dresden, Germany, looking at Claude Lorrain's Assis and Galatia, a famous painting of the birth and possibly renewal of civilization, also known as the Golden Age. The painting is set on the edge of the Greek archipelago. The man and the woman are under a tent, and they are in love and capable of love. They are beautiful, and their life is happy and innocent, as Stravogin says. The painting takes on great significance for him. He writes thusly: "A wondrous dream, a lofty delusion, the most incredible vision of all that has ever been, to which mankind throughout its life has given all its forces, for which it has sacrificed everything, for which prophets have died on crosses and been killed, without which people do not want to live and almost cannot even die. This is the happiness and tranquility that human beings aim for, the summum bonum thought of by the ancient philosophers. Could Stravogin ever have this peace of mind, almost this childlike innocence, characteristic of these simple, loving Greeks? They had no home, no possessions, barely any clothes, but they had a natural life, simple. Could he have that? Then his dream is shattered with a vision of Matrosha shaking her fist at him. Nothing tormented him more. She blamed herself for her condition, and it threatened him, tormented him. What he had done cut him off from happy innocence, the tranquil peace of mind that Assis and Galatia had suggested. Is this what is called remorse of conscience or repentance? Stravogin asks. What was Stravogin to do with this vision, especially the juxtaposition of these 2 visions, the vision of innocence and the vision of accusation, innocence and conscience-stricken anguish? Soon thereafter, as he continues his story, he fell in love with Lisa. What everyone saw in Switzerland is what happened. They fell in love. But here we find out why he left. He had confessed everything that had happened to Darya, the serf girl. The serf girl, an innocent and simple woman herself, told him that it would be wrong for him to marry again and to keep tempting Lisa. So lest he commit a new crime, the crime of bigamy, he left suddenly. Lisa blamed Darya for this, and she is right to blame her in a sense. Darya is the nurse of Stravogin's soul. She cares for his soul. But Stravogin still had Matrosha on the brain. And he still does when he confesses to the bishop. He wants his confession to be public, loud, and the condemnation of all to fall on him. He has written it all up into a pamphlet that he wants to publish, and he wants to distribute 300 copies. He deserves the public opprobrium, and he knows it, and he wants the legal consequences too. He wants to be brought low. Thus ends the letter. Then there is 10 pages or so of dialogue between the bishop and Stravogin. The bottom line of this dialogue is that the bishop tries to convince Stravogin that many people confess to him without conscience, without genuine remorse. His crime is deep and terrible, and he wants to be forgiven, and he wants to forgive himself. All people, the bishop contends, are implicated in Stravogin's sin. There is a collective responsibility for it. This is what the bishop says. If you believe that you can forgive yourself and can attain to this forgiveness in this world, then you believe everything. How is it that you say you do not believe in God? Good question. Stravogin prepares to leave, and indeed does leave without his confession that he is forgiven or accepting God's absolution. Tikhon tries everything, really. Suicide is not the answer unless it comes with an understanding of absolution, he says. Stravogin's desire for martyrdom is notable and laudable, but it will not silence his demon. Perhaps Stravogin should join a monastery or make a vow to live a life of penance. Stravogin leaves, calling Tikhon a cursed psychologist on the last line of the appendix. Thus ends the confrontation. We can understand Stravogin's strange unwillingness to act or even to cozy up to anyone in light of this talk. He is unable to live with the wrongs that he has done. His anguish is real. He longs to escape for a simple life somewhere. We will see more of this later. He is forever isolated from the innocent world of Lorraine's painting. He is forever restless and homeless. The only way out would be accepting forgiveness, the Christian way, or denying the world and remaking the world, Pyotr Stepanovitch's way. Many have lined up in his mockery of the Christian view in this book. Kirillov, Pyotr, Lebedkin, all deny the simple voice of conscience, but not Stravogin. What comes of a man like this in a society that denies the pangs of conscience? Can he come to the Lord? Can anyone? The next video concerns two men and how they live in light of this cursed psychology. One who denies the voice of conscience, and the other who finds a path to self-respect.